The questions log. Week 4. Day 9. Nothing. Day 10. Nothing. Day 11. Wino urinated on door. Wow. Day 12. Nothing. Day 13. Nothing. I wish the wino would come back. This is 52 Pickup. Hello, and welcome to 52 Pickup, a podcast about the greatest comic you've never heard of. I'm professional DC Comics expert Alex No Mouth Jaffe.
And I'm Gita Jackson.
Hi, Gita.
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
Oh, it's hot. It's a hot one.
It's like, 30 inches from the midday sun. David and I did that earlier today, back and forth.
It's another hot one.
Yeah, New York's having a little bit of a heat wave, and that's where we both are.
Yeah.
So in different parts, we're in the same geographical location.
Which is where the DC Comics offices were back in 2006 when this comic was being published.
Different time.
Yeah.
This issue in particular, especially the backup, did remind me of how different of a world this comic is in now than when it was initially produced. For the last episode, we talked a lot about the sort of post 9/11-ness of the book.
Yeah.
But there is just like a whole different media landscape surrounding superhero stuff than there was in 2006. It is just wild to think about, but before then, we have to do some other things.
Sure. What were the big superhero movies of 2006?
Let's see. What was out in 2006? I know that is post Spider-Man.
That's Superman Returns.
Yeah. So we got X-Men: The Last Stand, Superman Returns, really.
And My Super Ex-Girlfriend. Remember that?
Oh my fucking God. That seemed like a whole mess. 300 is maybe the most popular and successful comic book movie of that time.
Oh, the start of Zack Snyder's career.
Yes, pretty much. So we are post Spider-Man and X-Men, but in fact, X-Men: The Last Stand, the one that nobody likes,
right.
It comes out that year, but we are not yet in the Marvel era. So certain things that need to be explained in the backup, especially, nowadays you wouldn't even have to explain them, which is very, very interesting to think about. But we'll get there when we get there.
Before we get there, how about we talk talent?
Let's freaking do it.
So Jack Jadson is back inking Joe Bennett after Rui Jose filled in for a couple issues. We got Rob Lee, our fourth letterer in 4 issues. It kind of seems like they had trouble finding a consistent letterer at this point, but Rob would stick around for a while. I checked out Rob's website. And the most interesting thing I found there were all the different drafts he did for the Crime Bible 5 Lessons of Blood miniseries.
Oh, that's cool.
Which picks up Renee Montoya's storyline after 52. You want to tab through these with me?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of different good ones. I like, of course, every time you cut out letters and make it look like a ransom note. That's one of my favorite things.
Sure. It's very evocative of the yarn and thumbtack murder board.
Yeah. I also like the version of the logo with thumbprints all over it. I feel like that does give you crime without going overly literal.
Mm-hmm.
These are very inventive. And then, of course, he has a much simpler one. We really attracted to this bright yellow, which I think works well.
Yeah, a lot of cool logo design from our letterers here. Let's talk about the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Something I want to start doing before we actually get into the meat of it.
Another classic this week, just another banger. Who's on the talent for the cover?
J.G. Jones, as usual. It's J.G. Jones and Alex Sinclair every single week.
Wow. I mean, It's did really help in terms of the issue on the newsstand with keeping the covers looking so consistent, because the art, the interiors, there's a little bit of a shuffling, there's a little bit of who's available to help us this week.
Right.
It seems like. But I love J.J. Jones's covers. I love Renee here. I love the giant question mark, the big bloody question mark. And although this is not quite how this creature would look in the comic, I think he's a really cool looking guy.
We got this gray-skinned tank top wearing vampire dude.
Yeah.
Who's sneaking up on Renee. And a lot more in line with what we'll see develop in this plot line, where there's kind of a sort of secret vampire cult kind of deal going on. So it feels a little bit more like J.G. Jones was operating from the assignment. Whereas the monster we'll eventually see in this same scene as it plays out in the book itself is, I would say, more imaginative.
Yes, I would say it has more going on.
Yes.
But that takes us straight into the beginning of the issue, I think. Week 4, day 1, we do open on Renee Montoya.
Back at 520 Kane Street doing surveillance.
Yeah, she's on a stakeout, and it's at the behest of the... Well, we'll figure that out in a second, actually, because we actually have a couple of things. In this issue, I noticed they structured the story a little bit differently from the previous issue, which is interesting, but does make it a little harder to talk about on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this issue, the storylines are structured by lots of things are simultaneously happening on the same day, for instance.
Like how they'll do that split screen on 24, where you'll see a couple scenes happening at once.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the previous issue, it was more like every day a different thing happened to a different hero, which is like a little bit easier to parse on the first read through, you know, like you get all the big capital letters beats, you know, and here we're going back and forth between a lot of things, like a lot of things are going on. It does give you a sort of feeling of pressure throughout the issue, like very appealingly, but I'm going to get confused. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, Sunday is a busy day this week.
Yeah, apparently everything's happening on Sunday. So Renee is like almost falling asleep on the stakeout, basically. Her narration is extremely good in this issue.
Rucka describes his style here when talking about Renee's narration as half Raymond Chandler, half Douglas Adams.
Pretty accurate, honestly.
Right.
She's a little bit funnier than Raymond Chandler, but...
Well, there's the Douglas Adams part.
Yeah, exactly.
Rucka quoted Chandler from a 1945 essay, The Simple Art of Murder, when he was talking about Renee's writing style here, to describe his view of the question, where Chandler wrote, "Down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid." And I feel like that really defines Renee's arc, especially post 52, where we'll see Rucka take her in her own miniseries and in the Detective Comics backups that he'll do to Batwoman's sort of debut there.
Hell yeah. So as we transition to the next scene of this day, this is the page with the title on it, the 2-page spread here.
I do have one more thing I want to say about this Renee scene.
Tell me what you want to say about Renee. I always want to hear it.
Renee mentions that she's putting up with this because she was paid $200 a day up front for 3 weeks. Where did Vic Sage get $4,200? He doesn't have a job. He stopped showing up to work, so he was fired because he was presumed dead.
Yeah.
How does he have this money to give away?
Do you think he's like a day trader? That would be the funniest answer for me. And he's just like, I'm really good at the stock market.
I've been putting a lot of money into GameStop.
He would be able to do that, though.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would find a reasonable short from like a mile away. Being a PI, I guess, would help with that because you can illegally investigate all of their financial claims. One
interesting detail Keith Giffen added to the scene is if you look closely, you'll see Renee chewing on aspirin as opposed to just swallowing it.
Yeah.
That's an old trick that Giffen knew for like if you're an alcoholic. That's a way to quicken the relief that comes from aspirin.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a hangover trick.
That's so funny. I wouldn't have put that together, but that's such a classic noir thing. The mood for these 2 pages are also this 1 page. I love the blue tones of the coloring. You're really using, like, it feels very much like a filmic day for night scene where the light is just filtered blue through everything. It's really beautiful.
Okay, now we can go on to what is essentially the first page of Grant Morrison's Space Heroes story.
Yeah, this is like the storyline where Grant Morrison gets to let it all hang out, basically. Yeah. You know, Grant is doing Grant stuff here. And the first indication we have of this is the splashy title page. So in between, it's 6 panels on the spread, it's 2-page spread, 3 panels on each page. They're all vertical, like, you know, like a cinematic screen. And in between them are the credits. And then the final, title is the title of the issue.
The title is Dances with Monsters, a reference to Dances with Wolves. Have you seen Dances with Wolves?
I haven't seen Dances with Wolves, but it's like one of those. It's like a Pocahontas, basically, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw it when I was very young. I haven't revisited that particular chapter of Kevin Costner's oeuvre. But, there are monsters here, and there's a sort of dance. I don't think there's a lot more to read into it.
No, I don't think so either. There's no Pocahontas story goes on in this comic book, thank goodness.
No.
But here, they're in space, and it's a kind of a Morrison-y idea that these astronauts are out here looking for the space heroes that have been lost during the crisis. Mm-hmm. And one of them is a metahuman who keeps repeating, lightning that can't strike.
This is Halo. Halo was a member of Batman's Outsiders in the 1980s.
Oh.
Back in the 80s, Batman wanted to create a team of covert ops superheroes that could go the places that the Justice League couldn't. Basically his own Suicide Squad before the Suicide Squad. And Katana was on that team, and Black Lightning was on that team, and Metamorpho was on that team. And he also enlisted this young lady named Gabrielle Doe, who was dead, but was also the host for this millennia-old entity called the Oracle, Aurakle, that was sometimes difficult to relate to and sometimes thought she was Gabrielle Doe. It was Mike Barr on his bullshit, but...
Yeah, that sounds like something that Grant Morrison would be obsessed with for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly the kind of character Grant Morrison would be obsessed with. And the character has all these light and spectrum powers, which makes her a perfect choice to be the one trying to read these Zeta beams.
Yeah. Which
are how these heroes were lost in Infinite Crisis. And what I want to draw attention to in this scene is this repeated lightning that can't strike phrase, which is referring to basically a laser that's frozen in place, as we'll see, that teleporting beam. The background of that bubble is done in the exact same way that Delirium speaks in Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Oh my god, you're totally fucking right. It's got tiny little wiggly text, and it has a colored background. It has a wiggly outline.
Yeah. Which I feel like must be an intentional choice, either if that's by Morrison's script or just a Rob Lee thing. It feels appropriate.
I wouldn't put it past Morrison to be like, yeah, she talks like how Delirium talks. It's a way to describe the scene. It's a good shorthand for the kind of a textual effect that he wanted here. That she is speaking about something that's occurring extra normally, right? That is a little bit alien and uninterfaceable for the other people, the non-metahumans that are present.
The last thing I want to say is that the astronauts call for President Horn, who is a totally fictional guy that we don't really know a lot about. He's after Lex Luthor was impeached, which we talked about last week. We had kind of a parade of fake stand-in presidents until Obama came back.
Yeah. If you're going to be the company with the real presidents, then you better have Obama.
Right. So for 2000 to 2004, we had Lex Luthor. And then from 2004 to 2008, we had a bunch of fake stand-in guys. And when you look at the entirety of DC history, the only real president who's missing from the timeline is George W. Bush.
That's fantastic. I love that. Good for everyone on that planet, right? A better outcome than normal. It just, the number of fake stand-in guys, though, it makes me think they just had a series of very intense succession crises, one after the other.
One of the guys was named Gonzo the Mechanical Bastard. Maybe we'll talk about him at some point.
Wait, they let a guy like that be president?
Well, he was pretending to be another guy.
Okay, fair enough. Gonzo the Mechanical Bastard. Oh my god. I need to know everything about his presidency. It reminds me a little bit of that John Boyce video where he goes through the transfer of power in the universe of 24, where at one point a guy stops being president because he just doesn't want to be president anymore.
I actually... for an article I once wrote, traced down the succession line of everyone who was president during this time. Pete Ross, who's Superman's best friend from when he was a kid, he was president for a little while. He was Luthor's vice president, so he took over right after Luthor was impeached. And he did not last long in that role. He was like, I can't be president. I'm Pete Ross.
He just, lack of confidence in himself. That was the reason why he stepped down. Y'all, I can't do it.
And that's why Lana Lang is with John Henry Irons now.
That's so smart. That's such a smart thing to do. I mean, just fictionally and also, like, good for him.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I love learning a little bit more about the fictional history of the DC universe because it gets real silly in some places.
You're going to get that constantly here.
I cannot wait. So the next, on the same day, very busy day this Sunday, we are also giving a bird's eye view, a sort of fly on the wall view of Booster Gold getting in a fight with B, aka Fire, Beatriz. And this argument is that she's really unhappy that he doesn't want to join her on the search for the space heroes that have been lost because he is too busy getting brand deals. And during the scene, a commercial for a Big Belly Burger in which he stars also is playing on a television in the background. And she's super mad at him. I think rightfully so.
Big Belly Burger is recently featured in the Blue Beetle movie.
Really? It's in the Blue Beetle movie? I can't wait.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of a pivotal plot point.
Oh, my God!
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
We're going to see that Blue Beetle movie this weekend. It's we'll report back in the next episode, probably.
Yeah. But, I mean, this scene is pretty basic. It's given the, through the 6-panel grid layout, which Morrison has previously described as very television, which is what it feels like. It feels very much, again, like tonally, like a scene out of an evening soap or something. Which
is what this whole thing is going for. This is the writer's room comic.
Yeah, essentially.
We're proving a concept.
They try to give you television of different genres here. And they benefit really greatly from the expanding levels of things you can do on television that's occurring exactly at this time.
I do want to point out the significance of using B specifically for this scene.
Sure.
That Booster and B were teammates back in the Justice League International days. For many years they worked together, and Booster was always kind of a joke, but he did get on board when the team was doing a mission and helped everybody save the day.
Yeah.
And all of their teammates have kind of gone their separate ways. Ice is dead at this point. She died in a Justice League Europe mission. So Fire's kind of been lost, and we'll follow her plot into Checkmate after 52. But she is kind of distraught that Booster has absolutely fallen into his old pre-JLI patterns of looking for the money and kind of losing focus of what this heroism thing is about.
Yeah. There's also, I just noticed in this panel, there's one little plot driving forward thing in one of these panels. On the second page of this spread.
Oh, yeah.
There is a Post-it note. It's oversized. It can't possibly be a Post-it note, a notebook page. And it has a bunch of names of different scientists, I'm assuming, or time travel related people.
Oh, yeah. This picks up from the cliffhanger last week where Booster's like, we're going to go see Rip Hunter.
Yeah.
Well, why isn't Rip Hunter in this scene? This notepad shows us that he wasn't able to find Rip Hunter's phone number.
Himbo, I love it. He's like, I Googled him and I got no results. I don't know what to do.
So the other names on this list are Jeffrey Smith and Bonnie Baxter, who were both members of Rip Hunter's Time Masters back in the Rip Hunter Time Master series from the 50s. The only one missing from this is Bonnie's brother, Corky.
That's adorable.
And, the last one is just, I don't know, Star Labs. Do they have a time division? They do. I guess they do. They must. So yeah, it's kind of Himbo Booster grasping at straws because Skeets has been less than useless lately.
They're good at what they do. That's what I'll say. Yeah. They are definitely good at what they do. They're very good at writing comics. Finally, we transition to another day. Now we're on week 4, day 3.
Nothing happened on Monday.
No.
Everybody slept through Monday.
Yeah. Monday, everyone's like, let's take a break. Come on. But on Tuesday, back in action. Tuesday night, Renee tries to smoke a cigarette, and she's interrupted by the question. And she tells him to bite her, and he says, I can't, no mouth.
Well, tellingly, he asks her, he introduces himself by asking, how many packs a day? Because the question himself used to be a smoker. And that's going to come up later.
Yeah.
So it's more of Vic intruding into Renee's life. I love this scene. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire 52 series. It is truly indicative in like 6 panels what the question Renee's relationship is. Before he shows up, Renee's got this great notepad where she's kind of taken notes about everything that's happened over her eventless surveillance. She has one day highlighted when a wino urinated on a door, and she wrote, "Wow," next to it. She's like, I wish the wino would come back.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I do like this is classic television, the two cops that can't get together.
Yeah, exactly.
He is a little bit of a prude and she's, got a screw loose, basically, is the vibe that they're going for. Where he's really pushing into her personal life and actually showing concern for her, and she's trying to say fuck off, but she doesn't really want him to leave her all alone. Also, her life would be more exciting if there were a mystery. Another great scene between those two. What's happening also simultaneously in Metropolis, though, is I think perhaps, I don't know, I have some feelings about the John Henry Iron storyline.
Yeah, I want you to talk about go off on this John scene.
Okay, so we're with John, and he is doing maintenance on and kind of dismantling his steel armor. And while this is happening, he's speaking to himself. He's saying, kind of talking about the situation with Natasha, but also kind of talking about or to a hallucination of steel armor itself that is trying to argue against him. I don't know really how clearly this scene is communicated.
Yeah.
Number one, I'm having a difficult time when I read it understanding where he is in, actually, when is the significant event occurring? Because when we move to the next 2 pages, you realize that he is actually having some kind of bodily reaction. His skin is steaming, he's screaming, he has to go to the toilet to throw up, and the hallucination of the steel armor is telling him that he's been poisoned, and he's like, I know, someone poisoned me, and he's like, ooh, but who did it? But while this is occurring, he goes into his lab, and his hand melts an electronic appliance of some kind, and then an explosion of blue light spreads out from around him. So you kind of understand what's happening generally. The point of this scene is that he's bodily transmogrifying into a creature made out of steel, essentially. But there's a couple of panels in the first page of the spread where he's wearing a suit, and then a couple where he is not wearing a suit. He's wearing overalls. And I'm trying to understand if this first conversation where he's wearing a suit, is that something that really happened at a different time? Or is that something he's imagining? It
seems to be 3 different steals intercut. John in his superhero suit, which is John as a superhero. John wearing that sort of orange, is it orange business suit?
Yeah, it's an orangey brown.
All right, I'm colorblind. I need some help here.
I'll give you a hand.
Thank you. Where, it's representing him as CEO of Steelworks, trying to be a responsible parent, be a responsible figure for the future of Metropolis. And then we have him in the workshop, which is Steel in the real world, which is him kind of boots on the ground doing that machinist stuff, which is where he feels most comfortable. There are these 2 different idealized sort of super ego and id, which I think is going on here.
I think the problem here is the attempts to use a filmic language and translate it one-to-one to comics, where in a movie, when you're dealing with the moving image, you have a lot of different techniques to demonstrate that he's thinking about something, even a fade of some kind or a sound effect or having the audio from one scene play over something else happening in another scene while the actor looks contemplative. That's clearly what they're trying to communicate here, that he's having a mental argument with himself. Right. And then part of that is bleeding out into the world where he starts hallucinating. It's just that they don't use all those tools that are available. It comes off as more disjointed.
John is talking a lot here about Reign of the Supermen, which is where he first became Steel, where he's been in this situation where Superman was off the board before and he had to step up. And he's trying to learn from his mistakes there, that sort of situation was untenable and we kind of only got rescued by it because Superman came back. But we can't depend on that. So we need to change something about the status quo. And what's interesting is that's exactly the story that's playing out in Steelworks right now, which is the 6-issue Steel story that Michael Dorn is writing. Yeah.
Michael Dorn?
Yeah. Star Trek's Michael Dorn.
Well, I mean, good for him, dude. Like, have a good one.
He did voice Steel in Superman the Animated Series, so there's a connection there.
That makes complete sense, by the way. That's brilliant casting. It's very interesting. I mean, Steel is an interesting character to me because he is essentially like the benevolent neoliberal vision of a black capitalist, right? Like a guy who comes from nothing and just happens to be a brilliant engineer and gives back to his community, like the real Jay-Z model of gentrify your own hood, you know, where he is correct, but he's also hell of preachy. Like, he is incredibly preachy, and you can absolutely see why Natasha is very irritated with him. I think that there's some uneven writing in their rivalry, like, coming forward, like, in the coming days, in the coming issues, we'll see. But here, you come off with a guy, like, the internal conflict is what I hope all black capitalists are thinking about all of the time. You know, if they're really doing any good by telling people to pull up their pants, like that's like the way John Henry is trying to be right now. He is like very much a pull up your pants, respectability politics guy. He isn't wrong, of course, that the power vacuum did lead to an untenable situation, but the way in which he's trying to instill responsibility in Natasha is not going to lead to the results he wants. Like, he just comes off as a scold. I will say Steel was created by two white people. Yeah.
He was created by Louise Simonson, who was, I believe, the first female Superman writer. And John Bogdanove, an artist at the time, who also worked on Power Pack, some other stuff. And I'm pretty sure the first black person to touch Steel, in the comics at least, was Priest in the 90s Steel ongoing series. That makes a lot of sense.
He basically got handed every single black character as soon as people figured out he could write and the shit would sell.
Yeah. Back in 2016, when DC was approaching Priest to come back, he's like, I'll do it, but I don't want to write another black guy. I just want to write... Give me one of your white guys to write. I want to try something else.
Yeah, but now he's back in the I'm writing black guy slot. He's writing the new Black Adam, who is like a distant descendant, Malik.
Yeah, he just finished that, and he's doing Superman Lost now.
Wow.
Which is a really interesting story about Superman getting stranded on the other side of the universe for what seems like 20 years from his perspective, but was just a day from Lois's. So he comes back extremely haunted from it and just has to like work off all this trauma.
Well, it must be hard to be married for that guy.
Yeah. It's rough.
It must be really difficult. That's a great concept. Priest is a great writer.
Priest rules.
Also a weirdo.
Yeah.
like a mega weirdo. Like, not in a way that I want to bring shit, but like the dude's not regular and he's very proud of that. Like,
you gotta be weird to work in comics this long, honestly.
That's really fucking... I mean, he was one of the first black people to break through. So you gotta be a little bit weird to be one of the first, right? Like, you just have to be.
Yeah, he helped write the Bible for Milestone.
Yeah. You know, he's a foundational part of comic books history. But, like, breaking through as one of the first of anything is difficult. It's really, really hard. I remember reading essays he just still has on his website where he talks about everybody in the DC office coming to rub his head for good luck.
Oh God.
Yeah. Just like
that's bad.
To be have the fortitude to experience that and then continue to coming to work every day.
I know.
You have to be a very particular kind of person.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could do that, right? I think I would probably bite someone's hand off. Like, I would not be happy with that.
No.
But I'm in a different situation. I don't have to deal with being the first.
Not to say it's not still a problem.
Yeah, there are a lot more firsts to be had, and there's a lot more progress to be made, and we are achingly slowly dragging our feet towards a better future.
Amen.
Amen. Amen to that. Speaking of a better future, what's Ralph Dibny up to on another new day of the week 4, day 4?
Oh, here we go. Everybody's favorite storyline.
Yes, the slowest
Here
bird.
to brighten everybody's day is...
Yeah, the suicidal man reads a resurrection call. That sounds like the beginning of a really horrible joke.
Yeah, last time we saw Ralph, he was meeting with Cassie Sandsmark's Krypton-themed resurrection cult to bring back Superboy and other various people who died in the crisis. Black Adam mentioned the number last issue. Literally millions of people died. So there are gonna be some weirdos. It's kind of like how after World War I is where kind of seances and spiritualism really picked up.
Yes.
Because everybody knew a dead person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, it's that kind of stuff, that kind of history is always really interesting to me because it's also like the fundamental basis for a lot of magic and magic stuff. You know, it's that kind of mysticism, the people that could continue to make a living afterward rebranded as just magicians because they do how to do a lot of sleight of hand now. And it's there's a lot of crossover too. Some magicians would refuse to do those mysticism type things because they understood the clear ethical violation here. You're giving false hope to someone that just wants to talk to a dead loved one.
Right.
It's fascinating. The book version of The Prestige, the Christopher Nolan film, the book that he bases off of, goes deep into the mysticism stuff. It's very interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's a very cool book. The book is really cool, actually. I don't remember why I read it, but I did, and he does a good adaptation, but the book is honestly better in some ways. But I always feel that way about the book. So.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Last time this storyline came up, I kind of had the question of how did Cassie get into all this Kryptonian resurrection cult stuff? And she does offer an answer here, introduces a man named Devim, who showed her how all this works. Now, Devim is kind of a deep cut.
Yeah.
He was Dev-M back in the 60s, where he was sort of the juvenile delinquent version of General Zod.
What?
Where he would show up from the Phantom Zone to harass Clark Kent in Smallville.
They invented an evil greaser from Krypton?
Like the kind of villain that Stephen King would create if he had to write Superboy.
Oh, that's literally so good. I'm so happy about this.
Yeah, that's Devin.
They should bring him back. James, I know you're not listening to this, James Gunn, but like, listen, the evil greaser concept, it's proven. People are scared of that.
I mean, if you want your chills to start multiplying, you need Devin.
Come on. Devim, oh my god, apparently he was in the short-lived Krypton television series.
Oh, I watched the first season of that. It was actually really good. It's just nobody watched it.
Yeah, people aren't interested in the Kryptonian extended universe, and I get why. Like, the point of Superman is that Krypton is no more.
Yeah, it's who wants to watch a show about Superman's grandpa?
Yeah.
You mean his dad? No, his grandpa. One generation before that.
Oh my god, it's a little bit like why no one watched like the Battlestar Galactica sequel show that was a prequel that was set on Caprica.
Yeah.
They only got 3 seasons.
Because we all know what happens.
Like, they're all gonna die. We all know. The foregone conclusion of the prequel makes it difficult to care about, you know? There's only one situation where I cared about it, and that was Star Wars Episode 3.
Yeah, the thing about Krypton, the show, that made it interesting, that really should have been in the marketing, is that General Zod goes back in time to stop the explosion from happening. That's the story.
That should have been in the marketing for sure. My mind is like, my head is spinning around like 360 degrees. Like, what the fuck? Why didn't they tell me that?
And Adam Strange has to go back to prevent him from stopping Krypton from blowing up, because if Superman doesn't exist, it'll fuck up the entire timeline.
I'm gonna watch this shit immediately. Oh my god.
It's really good, Gita.
That sounds like a lot of fun. That's so good. I bet they expected people to not know who those characters are. But if you just say he's going back in time to stop the Kryptonian explosion, like, people would know that. Everyone knows the origin of Superman.
The thing about Adam Strange in this series, if we can continue this Krypton tangent for a second, he's literally written exactly like Booster Gold. He was clearly meant to be Booster Gold, but they couldn't use Booster for some reason. But if you watch this show, the show is Booster versus Zod, and he just calls himself Adam Strange for some reason. And Superman's grandpa gets caught in the middle.
Well, I'm sorry to that old man, Superman's grandpa, but that sounds like a lot of fun. I wish they could have just used Booster.
Yeah.
Imagine how much, like, so many people would have had their, like, 2006 brain, like, LiveJournal brain activated and rushed to their televisions.
That honestly would have saved the show.
Probably would have, honestly.
Yeah.
It's too bad they couldn't have used Booster, because the people are waiting. They are waiting. They are eager and ready for Booster Gold on a filmic medium.
Well, it's coming. So, yeah, they give Ralph Dibny this baptism, and by the time he gets out of the Kryptonian pool, everyone's gone.
Yeah.
He has to give them his wedding ring, because he's so desperate that like maybe if I give this up, it'll bring her back because I need something that means something to me for this ritual to work. But it feels kind of like he just got hustled for his ring.
Yeah, it kind of really does feel like they just stole from him and bounced.
Like the next scene is Devim and Cassie Sandsmark at a pawn shop.
Yeah, it's like, how much can we get for this? God. So moving on to the next day, busy in the beginning of the week, but in the end of the week, people's schedules cleared up.
That's how it works sometimes.
That's true. By day 5, we are back to our favorite storyline of all time, Vic, Sage, and Renee. And again, the use of light and shadow is really, really impressive in these particular pages. I'm thinking of when the 4 panels where Renee finally enters the warehouse. She sees something happening. Someone's entering the warehouse. And so she gets up and follows them. In one panel, she's illuminated. And the next panel, she's in the warehouse and it's dark and she's highlighted by the light behind her. This is like the most film-y they get.
Yeah, in the way that the shots are drawn, sure. But one thing I kind of noticed about this whole sequence that Joe Bennett does here is there's kind of a lot of male gaze going on. Like,
yeah, you're seeing a lot of her boob.
We're seeing a lot of her boobs. We're seeing a lot of her butt.
Yeah, it feels unnecessary. Especially, she does the thing that I especially hate about male comic art, like male comic artists, is where they draw each boob in a shirt like 2 separate orbs. That's just not how breasts work in clothing. Yeah. That's not what they look like. And she's definitely wearing a better bra than the ones that he has shown her wearing. I would be surprised if she wears anything other than a sports bra ever.
I mean, this is a queer character, and she's being written in, like, a very heterosexual view of how sexuality works kind of way.
Yeah, it's sort of like a man trying to understand what a down on her luck lesbian would do.
Right.
You know? Like, well, lesbians are basically just like men, right?
Right.
She also has a little bit of why can't my hips unsway in all of her poses, where for some reason she's always curving her spine seductively, when it's like, why is she doing that?
But enough of the leering at Renee, which is not our fault. We just had to talk about that. Yeah. Let's talk about what happens in this scene.
So she enters the warehouse and she's joined by Vic Sage. And as they start exploring, she flicks a switch and she thinks it's the lights, but it's actually a trap door. And a great bit, always a good bit to me personally. And as they drop to the trap door, they encounter a mutant of some kind, moving bosses.
I do want to highlight a joke that Vic Sage made in these panels first.
Which one?
Before we get to the mutant. When Renee supposes that this might be a secret door she's opening, Vic says, "What is this, D&D?" And when it does indeed turn out to be a secret door and Renee lands right on top of Vic, breaking her fall, he says, "Elf needs food badly."
I love it so much. I wrote that down also. I love it.
And that's a Gauntlet reference, like the old 80s Gauntlet arcade games, which are in the same genre of Dungeons & Dragons, but are a video game. And I just specifically want to point that out because this is our one piece of canonical evidence that Vic Sage is a gamer.
It's perfect. It's literally perfect. I wrote that down as my favorite line also. That was my favorite scene. Because I also love the banter between them. Like, Renee has absolutely no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah. The banter is terrific.
It's really fun in this scene. Even though this is the most danger Renee has ever been in, and it shouldn't really be exciting, and there's been so much ominous buildup. Yeah. As soon as they start sort of bouncing off each other, the scene is so much fun.
All the commentary that I've read on 52 to prepare for this, it's very clear that not just Greg Rucka, but Mark Waid and Jeff Johns' favorite part of this is the Vic and Renee dynamic, which is really on display in this issue. I don't think Morrison was paying much attention to this storyline.
No, I don't think so at all. I think this most likely did not interest him in any way.
Yeah.
I also like in the illustration here, you see Renee comes out guns a-blazing. She's armed, whereas Vic Sage hits him with the ineffectually kicks the mutant in the abs in this very kung fu-y looking like movie kung fu.
Right.
Looking flying kick.
Which has always kind of been his modus operandi. He was trained by Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter, who was one of the first characters that Denny O'Neil created and then imported over to DC after publishing him in like a pulp novel.
I was just literally just watching a video about the history of sort of fake kung fu experts and the proliferation of kung fu in the Western world. It's a video from Super Eye Patch Wolf, who's a YouTube guy that I really think is great.
Sure.
He mostly does like anime videos.
I am familiar with Super Eye Patch Wolf's work. He's good.
Yeah. The history that he outlines there is it's really interesting. Post World War II, a lot of, American GIs would go to Japan, learn a little bit of martial arts because they'd be fighting Japanese soldiers and needed to know how to counter some of these martial arts moves, and then would go back to America and start dojos. Mm-hmm. And of course, along with that, you'd see people claiming to have extra normal, like, martial arts skills, like being able to knock people out just by touching them or whatever.
You're Steven Seagals.
Yeah, but also, like, at that time, in the immediately post World War II, where do you advertise the skill level that you have? In the backs of comic books as a way to scam people out of their money, because they I can teach you our deadly techniques.
The quivering palm, the dim mock.
Yes, dim mock is perfect as an example of one of those styles. That was Count Dante. An incredible name.
Wow.
Advertised in the back of comic books. So, of course, people would start to notice there would start to be a crossover between the world of kung fu and, like, magical kung fu arts that don't exist and comic books and pulp fiction. And it makes so much sense to blend that with the noir stuff that goes on with the Question.
So we get this mutant who looks kind of like if the sandworm from Dune got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ooze on him.
That is such an accurate description. I was struggling to figure out how to describe this guy. He's big and green and ugly, basically, was what I was thinking. But he does look like your friendly neighborhood sandworm.
Yeah. He's got about the rough proportions of the Thing.
Yeah, he's he's about a really built, like, 6'8" guy that's green and lumpy.
A much more interesting looking monster than the one on the cover, I will say.
Yeah, the one on the cover was just like a gray skin-toned human with elf ears.
Kind of a hunky vampire.
Yeah, to me, I was going to say like an orc from Shadowrun.
Shadowrun orc, perfect.
Yeah, somewhere in between those two, I think. But he didn't really have, like, he had normal teeth, as far as we know. we didn't get a good look on them. But this one has gross, big old chompers. They're really nasty and green, and there's got fluid and drool coming off of them. It's not so nice.
So Renee and Vic are doing their damnedest to fight this thing, got super strength, got him on the ropes, until Renee manages to pull out a pistol from one of the many crates in this warehouse they discovered, which is just full-on Jack Kirby with all these sort of dials and wires on it.
It's even illustrated like it's like made out of chrome, essentially.
Yeah, it's
like
brighter than everything else on the page.
It's reflecting light that does not appear to be in the scene,
Yeah, like it's glowing with moonlight.
Yeah.
And Renee kind of looks at it admiringly and lets out a damn. And that's how I feel looking at that thing.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking sick.
Quite a piece.
Yeah. So we move on to the next day, the last day of the week. And we are rejoining the astronauts that have locked onto the signal they were searching for in the beginning of the issue. And they're really hopeful that these are the lost heroes. And there's some of them, and they're not doing so well.
Yeah. They managed to recover them in Australia, location we'll return to later in this series. And we get a few of the heroes back. We get Mal, Duncan, and Bumblebee, who were members of the 60s Teen Titans, in very bad shape. We get what appears to be Firestorm and Cyborg kind of fused together into one body. We have a giant Hawk Girl who is not supposed to be that size. And we have Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, missing an eye. Clearly there was some kind of teleportation accident. Reconfiguring everybody's atoms from one place to another is going to change some shit around if you're not totally careful about what you're doing. And this is exactly the kind of David Cronenberg The Fly shit that Grant Morrison would totally be about.
Absolutely. 100%.
One thing I will say about this scene is that it does, in fact, for I believe the first time, resolve one of the stories from 1 year later.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
In 1 year later, in those titles, we see Alan Scott is missing an eye. He's wearing an eye patch under his mask. And we're supposed to be like, well, what happened to his eye? Where did it go? And this is what happened. He came back to Earth without it. There was a teleporter accident.
Well, it seems like that was one of the easier mysteries to solve.
Exactly. So this feels like one of the few breadcrumbs they would give publishers like Dan DiDio early in these stages to be like, we promise we're getting to it. Let us work up to it. And this, if you give it time, it's all going to address everything on your little list. But it absolutely didn't.
It certainly didn't. No, it certainly did not. But that is where the issue ends. Now we move on to the backup story.
All right. We are in part 3 of History of the DCU, which is the same talent as our last couple issues, Dan Jurgens, Art Thibert. You kind of get the sense that they wrote all 10 of these at once and just kind of divvied it up between all 10 of these issues.
Yep. You do get that feeling. It reads better as one continuous story than as a story that has breaks in any part. And I can see why they'd want backups for the 52, because it doesn't feel quite as meaty as a show. You know, something about reading a comic is a little bit more ephemeral, and as much as they try to give it the TV level of drama, you especially see with the panel layouts here in this issue in particular, that they're trying to convey a level of drama that you get from television. Mm-hmm. But a comic that comes out weekly is just shorter. It's just shorter than a television show.
Yeah, it's not an hour-long drama. It takes an average of 5 to 10 minutes to read through a regular-size comic.
And you feel that at the end of the issue. You feel
it's the length of a Steven Universe episode.
Wow. Well, that's a good metric, I think.
Yeah.
David and I have started referring to any event that takes 2 hours as a movie. So we go on the train to visit my parents, like, it's like a movie!
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, the backups help give it the sort of weightiness that they were looking for. Like, this is a substantial, cool thing that happens every week. Like a television show feels like a really astronomical event on a week basis. So
this is a summary, quick and dirty 4-page what happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is kind of a task in and of itself, because Crisis on Infinite Earths is such a humongous thing.
A lot of events occur.
Yes. They literally impress on you that it is a crisis on infinite Earths.
Yeah, they give you I'm sure it must have been incredible to understand that scale when you were reading it initially. Now, after multiverses are things that people are more familiar with, I'm sure it feels a little bit more tedious. But that was it was one of the first times that people would see an editorial move taking manifesting so physically in the fiction of the world, where they weren't just wiping things out as a matter of course to kill some lines to sort of make room for stuff that would sell more. They're wiping stuff out so that you, the reader, understand why it is happening, because it's too confusing.
Right. They wanted to give you closure to 50 years of continuity.
Yeah, and it is an astronomical task, especially if you have no models on how to do it.
No one's done it before.
Yeah.
There was literally someone's job during Crisis on Infinite Earths to read every book that DC had ever published so they could account for everything that had happened. It took them 2 years.
Holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
I feel like that job belonged to you in a past life.
Yeah. DC, next time you have an event, give me a call.
Absolutely.
We see this antimatter wave that's wiping everything out, starting with Earth 3. Earth 3 is the world where all the heroes are bad and the villains are good. And hamburgers eat people and people walk on their hands. No. Major thing about Earth 3 is that the last survivor of it, Superman style, who they send off in a rocket, is Alexander Luthor Jr., the son of Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. Alexander Luthor Jr., because he is from this universe that has antimatter particles as opposed to matter particles, because everything's reversed, he becomes a key part in defeating the Anti-Monitor at the very end. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Alex Luthor Jr. and what happened to him later. He becomes a major part of Infinite Crisis.
Yes. So this is if you have read Infinite Crisis before, I have. This is really a summary. It is like really glosses over a lot except for the biggest bullet points. One of the biggest bullet points being the death of Kara Zor-El, which is, if you buy the edition of Crisis on Infinite Earths that I have, features Superman in the Pietà pose with Supergirl in his arms. That is one of the biggest, that was for a long time one of those deaths that really stuck. Because people couldn't figure out what to do with Supergirl, really. You explained the sort of publication, reason, the editorial reason why this had to occur, I think, in a previous episode, but...
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what they wanted to do was, when they were clearing the decks to retell everybody's story with after Crisis on Infinite Earths, they wanted to affirm the fact that Superman was the last Kryptonian.
Yes.
That having all these other Kryptonians around would dilute that brand, that you lose the tragedy of him being the last of his race if there are other people around. So we lost Kara until 2003.
Yeah.
And another Supergirl would show up, but she had a completely different origin. She was a science experiment created by a Luthor from a pocket dimension.
I read that book.
Yeah. Then there was Linda Danvers in the 90s, who was like an earthbound angel.
Yeah, I read that book too. It was really weird.
Yeah. But yeah, we wouldn't get a true Kryptonian Kara until 2003. And what's really significant about this scene, where Donna is rediscovering what happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths, is that she remembers the original Supergirl, and nobody does. She was erased from everybody's memory when the universe was reformed. We get this very kind of girls' love story from the romance era of comics panel of her shedding a single tear.
Oh, it's a beautiful illustration.
And exactly the kind of shit that Roy Lichtenstein would steal and put in a museum.
Absolutely, yes. I was just about to say, this looks like something that Lichtenstein would have ripped off.
Yeah.
The tear is just emerging out of her eye. And it's there's a lot of weight in that tear. It's not just a pretty little line. And her eyebrow is literally perfect. It's and there's also my favorite thing that they do with Donna Choi is when they put stars in her hair. And it looks really, really good in this really zoomed in close-up.
That's pure Phil Jimenez.
Yeah, it's so good.
It was the stars in her hair and the stars in her costume. I remember there was one great Titans story where the Titans get lost somewhere in the universe and they don't know where they are, but they're able to orient themselves by looking at the stars in Donna Troy's costume.
That's so funny. That is something that I would go goo gaga over. That is such a funny detail. I love comics sometimes.
Comics rule. There's only one more thing I want to point out about this backup, which is there's a very sneaky word in the narration when it's going over what happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths. One little addition where the AI that Donna is talking to says that Harbinger, possessed by the Anti-Monitor, seemingly killed the Monitor. That's the first time we see the word seemingly.
Seemingly, huh?
Yeah, because for many, many years, for 30 years, I guess at this point, I guess it would be 20 years, everyone had obviously assumed that the Monitor was killed in this attack. We just never saw him again after this. It was very clear that he was dead. But with this edition, it's very clear that there's some kind of inkling going on at DC that they want to bring the Monitor back. And that's something that's going to play into Final Crisis. It's something that's going to be a huge part of Countdown. Clearly, somebody got the memo that the Monitor was coming back.
Wow. That's some allegedly business going on in here. It's very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like a never showed his body type move, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what they say about people dying in comic books. It's
But you did. You did show his body.
They very much did.
You were talking about the Pieta pose earlier. I remember earlier this year, maybe it was last year, I was wondering, what's the first instance I can find of DC Comics using that Pieta pose? Because you see Batman holding Robin like that a lot, especially Jason Todd in A Death in the Family.
Yep.
And I literally found Batman doing it with Dick Grayson in Batman #4.
Really?
This is as old as Batman.
That's so funny. He's always losing young ones and crying over them.
He's always doing it.
In the pose of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah. God.
Bob Kane might have actually drawn that sequence, if not one of his ghost artists.
That's really funny that, losing your young siblings is just baked into the DC universe. You're going to cry over a dead child. That's just what happens. Wow, I love these backups, I have to say. They really just expand my brain, I feel like. The summary, if you are not going to read Crisis on Infinite Earths, the summary is pretty much as good as you're going to get.
Sure. And for many years, I didn't. I didn't read Crisis on Infinite Earths for the first time until a long time after reading 52.
I read it first. I don't know why I came to that conclusion to do that, but yeah. I think I was reading 52, and then I read these backups, and then I was at the comic book store, and they had a collected edition, so I just bought it.
Yeah.
And then I read it.
It's a tough read.
It's hard because it really forces you to read comics in a different way than comics are written now. There's a lot of thought bubbles. People are always thinking things.
It's very like Norse mythology Ragnarok going on.
Yeah. It's big, and it's you're given the view from the top down, really. You are expected to keep track on a lot of little people that feel like ants after a while, you know, where the characters you like will pop up and appear for a millisecond, and then you're forced to follow the adventures of a different set of characters, often from a different universe that they've either just created or doesn't really get much play in DC.
One time I got the opportunity to ask Marv Wolfman, the writer of Crisis on Infinite Earths and Teen Titans and a bunch of other shit, one question. And what I asked him was, when you look through Crisis on Infinite Earths, you see basically every character DC had ever published. The one conspicuous absence, though, is Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan does not show up even once anytime throughout Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like, I know he was retired, but a lot of retired heroes kind of came back for that. And he was like, we already had all these Green Lanterns, and we just felt like leaving him alone.
Yeah, let him rest. That's very funny.
He basically said, I don't care much for Hal.
I love all ththese Green Lanterns equally. I don't care much for Hal. I mean, whomst among us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Johns.
Jeff Johns has some interesting...
Jeff sure loves him some Harold Jordan.
He's got some interesting ideas about Green Lanterns, I'll say.
Yeah.
Lord. So I think that concludes the issue, truly. Unless there's
Absolutely.
anything else.
We are at the very end.
Yes.
Which means it's time to go to the Blackboard.
I've got something to throw up on the Blackboard this week that I think is
what you got?
Pretty interesting. In the backup specifically, they introduce and explain, they spend an entire page explaining the concept of the multiverse, which now feels comical to read through, right?
Yeah.
Best Picture winner last year was a movie all about the multiverse. One of the most beloved expressions of superheroes in general is a multiversal threat story. Now, you know, comic book media, superhero media that exists outside of comics, and the threat of the world exploding and like the world ending is too banal. So they keep introducing the concept of the multiverse. And here you see it explained as if the reader might not know what it is.
Right.
It just makes me feel ancient. You know? It makes me feel so old.
It does kind of remind me, I was reading a Silver Age comic about the origin of Captain Comet, who's kind of an obscure DC hero. And the first time he appears, he has to identify himself as a mutant. And there is an editor's note. There's a caption in that page explaining to the reader what a mutant is.
Wild!
Yeah.
Right? Like,
this was before the X-Men, mind you.
Yeah. It's just incredible to see not just the influence of comics, but also how pop culture has sort of marched on and enveloped a lot of these comic book concepts into it. If you asked a random person on the street what a multiverse was like 10 years ago, they'd probably start trying to talk to you about quantum physics, right? But now they're going to talk to you about movies. Spider-Man. You know, they're talking to you about Spider-Man. The Flash movie also has a multiverse in it. You know,
yeah, but nobody's going to talk to you about the Flash movie.
No, nobody's seen the Flash movie. We might be the only two people who have. But, you know, even like Spider-Man generally, like not just the multiverse, you know, across the Spider-Verse movies, but mainline Spider-Man in the MCU introduced the multiverse, and the mainline Marvel Cinematic Universe has a multiverse. The DC Cinematic Universe has a multiverse. Like this is now something that young brains are being injected with, like early on.
Right.
It comes from comics. It's all comics.
All the way down.
Yeah.
Did you know the first multiverse story in comics was not a Flash story, but actually a Wonder Woman story?
I think I knew this, but I forgot the specifics of it.
There's a very early Wonder Woman comic where a different Wonder Woman shows up from like Dimension X, and it just kind of never comes up again. And she's an evil Wonder Woman and she's a good Wonder Woman. And, Flash gets all the credit for founding the multiverse, but there's this old Wonder Woman story nobody really talks about.
That's so funny. One of the first, I know after the reintroduction of the multiverse, after Infinite Crisis eventually, was actually Grant Morrison doing an Earth 3 story with the evil JLA.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great book, by the way. It's really fantastic.
One of my favorite Grant Morrison stories.
Yes, it's a really nice, closed, contained superhero story, so they don't, just go off on a flight of fancy for no reason. They
adapted it into an animated movie called Crisis on Two Earths, which is one of my favorite animated Justice League movies. It's a lot of fun.
I have to watch that. That's in the good era, I believe, of the DC animated movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pre-Flashpoint Paradox.
Okay, I'm going to add that to my queue. Can't wait to watch it.
I've got something on the Blackboard.
Please let me know what it is.
I want to talk a little bit more about Booster Gold this week.
Absolutely. Anything.
We find Booster Gold kind of a wreck in this issue, where Beatriz is just chewing him out for being a sellout. And she even mentions, after what happened to Ted, I thought you'd get your act together, which is a low blow.
Wow, that is a low blow. His fucking lover died, and you're throwing that out there?
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the shit Booster has been through, so maybe you can understand where his headspace is. We find out in Countdown to Infinite Crisis, where this whole event started, that Booster quit being a hero after Identity Crisis. When Ralph Dibny's wife was killed, he was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much, man. This used to be fun. And he hung it up and he tried to go home. And then Ted is kind of poking around this OMAC mystery in Countdown and stuff that was going on with Maxwell Lord being shady. Maxwell Lord being kind of the businessman agent of the Justice League when Booster and Ted were still on it. And when absolutely nobody will believe Blue Beetle that there's something hinky going on, Booster Gold is there. He's like, you know what? I can put this advertisement stuff I'm doing on the side because you're my bro and we got to ride together. And Booster, while looking into this with Blue Beetle, he gets struck by a bolt of lightning, which Blue Beetle assumes is his fault. Ted assumes it's his fault because he had just dug up the scarab for the first time in a long time, and he thought, oh, this must be the scarab, so he puts it away for safekeeping because it nearly killed Booster. But it was actually the OMAC Brother Eye satellite trained on him, trying to kill him.
Wow.
So while Booster Gold is laid up in the hospital, Blue Beetle goes after Max Lord, finds out his grand scheme to take over the universe, and Max shoots him through the head. So while Booster is helpless, laid up with burns all over his body, his best friend has to go confront his greatest enemy alone, and he's not there to help.
It's heartbreaking. It's so sad to read. That destroyed me as a 16-year-old.
Yeah. So throughout the OMAC Project series, which is one of the 4 books that lead up to Infinite Crisis, Booster is trying to figure out what happened to Ted because it was covered up. And when he finds out that it was Maxwell Lord who killed him, who was their sort of friend and collaborator and commiserator, and he would get in on these get-rich-quick schemes with them, and he was kind of a goofy guy they hung out with. Like the closest thing to a third guy in their sort of duumvirate. It was devastating to him because this was this guy who, Booster would not have gotten into the Justice League without Maxwell Lord. Maxwell Lord was the guy who put them there.
Yeah.
And to find out that Max Lord put him on there to keep the Justice League ineffectual, that he was cast because he's a loser.
It's so depressing. Oh my God.
It was devastating.
Yeah. And the scene in which Blue Beetle dies, in which Ted dies, he gets shot and he gets really shot.
Yeah.
It is not
he gets shot hard.
He gets shot in the noggin, straight in the brain. And they show you in detail the way that he dies. It's a whole hell of a lot. Whew.
So Booster has been through absolute hell. That this would happen to his closest friend and that he had been a joke his whole career. So he goes back to the 25th century. He's done. He just like he's writing off this whole superhero era.
Yeah.
It's over. But he ends up coming back in Infinite Crisis. It's alleged because he got in trouble in the 25th century again. So he needs to lay low while the heat dies down, which is kind of a silly idea when you're a time traveler.
Yeah, it's very funny.
But what he does when he comes back is he kind of redeems himself by finding the new Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes, and enlisting him to shut down the satellite that nearly killed him and that Ted died trying to uncover.
It is a great story also.
Yeah. It's one of the best arcs going on in Infinite Crisis, if not the best one.
I mean, I think the Jaime Reyes stuff, it works so well as like it's the only post-crisis to me, like book that was really worth reading because it actually does the thing that DC always says they want to do, which is like meaningfully like reinterpret these characters for new generations, right? And to like meaningfully use their legacy branding on characters that actually like hit and like have compassion. You know, the way that they set him up, I think it gives DC another like Spider-Man type guy, right?
Yeah.
They set him up as someone who needs to grow into the responsibility of being a hero. The joke of Jaime Reyes being that he's like already a really responsible guy. Like he wants to grow up and be a dentist so he can provide for his family. And he has to learn to like take more risks because he can, when he pushes himself to the limit, he can really achieve like a lot with the little Blue Beetle scarab. But it's just like a good origin, and that he already has a built-in series of characters from Crisis that will help him develop and grow. I mean, I immediately picked it up because Blue Beetle is the friends with Booster Gold. Like I just had to.
I mean, as great as Ted is, as much as everybody loves Ted, Jaime has really become my Blue Beetle. I love Jaime.
Wasn't expecting it to happen. And if Ted ever did come back, I would want him to be a mentor character. I don't want him to be... Because he is, in a big way, even though they never knew each other, he is the, like, Spider-Man's uncle Ben.
Yeah, the Uncle Ben, yeah.
He's like a mentor figure. It's an ideal that he tries to live up to. So I think that really allows the character to grow a lot very quickly into this, like, responsibility of being a hero. And also, Jaime's just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I love his family. I like that his family all loves him. It's just very sweet.
So when Fire is laying all this at Booster's feet and we find him kind of thrown entirely into the commercialism of the early 21st century and just doing his best not to think about the grand hero thing, it's because he had been so utterly defeated. And when he tries to tell Fire, look, I already did the hero thing. I saved the world in Infinite Crisis. It was a big deal. I'm done. Stop bothering me. This is what you have to really keep in mind is going through Booster's head at this point.
Yeah, this would have been fresh on your mind if you had read it. Or like a Booster Gan. If you were like a Booster Gold fan, that's where the malappropriatism came from, because I was trying to say Booster Gold and fan at the same time. If you were like me and like obsessively reading like blue and gold fan fiction like every day, then you definitely would empathize really deeply with where he's coming from. He's just like broken. Like the thing about Booster Gold is that he's a silly himbo, but also he's been through unimaginable amounts of psychic damage. He is not having a good time at any point. And all he really wants to do is have a good time. It's a tragedy of his himbo-ness.
Yeah.
But it's helpful context, I think for sure. I love Booster, and he's another character that only wins by losing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's cousins with Vic Sage in that way.
Yeah. They have a book club where they meet up with Kendall Roy.
Just perennial losers.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
It's what makes them interesting. It builds character. Not everybody can be Batman.
No. Some people need a little bit more growth.
Yeah. So obviously my favorite scene was the Question Renee scene where he kind of sneaks up on her and staking out the Kane Street place where they have that exchange where he's admiring her doodles. It's so iconic.
That's so cute. I love that. My favorite scene from this issue is also a Vic Sage Renee thing. Mine was actually Elf Needs Food Badly, which we talked about extensively. I love that because he's such a little nerd. I love that he's a nerd. And like, I love like how he's like something that nerds imagine doing all the time, which is like, what if I just got like super, super built and was like the same person, but also solved crimes?
One of the things I do for research for this show is that I try to find old message board posts from 2006 around the time that this was being published.
Yeah.
And one of the complaints people had about this scene is that they thought the question was being too funny, that he's not like a comedic character, and that he was taking too much of his Justice League Unlimited characterization.
It's like, I'm sorry, y'all. He's not too funny. You guys are just nerds.
Yeah, the thing is, if you go back and read the Denny O'Neil question series, he's making jokes like this all the time. There's a moment where someone has him at gunpoint and his last words are like, yeah, the last thing I want to say is Rorschach sucks.
That's so great. I gotta read the Denny O'Neil question. I really have to. It just sounds like a classic. And
It's so good.
I think the fact that he's funny makes the character better and also makes these scenes better. Like, Renee is such a stick in the mud, and she has her own sense of humor. I liked in your favorite moment where he tells her about how bad smoking is for you, and she just blows the smoke in his face.
Yeah.
Like, she's such a bitch to him. It's hilarious.
They're both funny characters, but they have very different senses of humor.
Yeah.
It's that Raymond Chandler, Douglas Adams dichotomy that Rucka was talking about.
I wonder if we could chart all the characters on this book on the...
Yeah, one is Sam Spade and the other is Dirk Gently.
Yes, very much so. Even the kinds of mysteries they explore are in that dichotomy.
Absolutely.
It's so fun to get them in the same place. I'm so excited for where the story's going to go. It's going to be really good.
Shall we get to asking the questions?
Let's do it.
First, we have our nerdy nitpicky question, and that's from Sebastian, who asks, do other alien races have access to Zeta Beam tech, or is it somehow unique to Ran for some reason? I remember humans use Zeta Beam tech for the Watchtower, but do the Thanagarians or Owens? Why isn't it more widely adapted, like 5G? Just teleport everywhere. So I have 3 thoughts about this.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. If it wasn't wrong from its very premise. It is a common misconception that the Justice League uses Zeta Beam technology for the Watchtower, mainly because that's how it works in the Young Justice animated series. But that hasn't been the case in the comics. Before Crisis on Infinite Earths, it was said to be Thanagarian technology, which is Hawkman's homeworld. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, it was Martian tech, because, Martian Manhunter has always been a member of the Justice League. It just makes sense. And in the New 52 in 2011, and this has basically been the case since then, it was Cyborg adapting the boom tube technology that he got from Darkseid, which also kind of makes sense in a way. It's an established way to teleport. The reason you don't want to use Zeta Beams is that, very famously, when you get hit by a Zeta Beam, what happens is the radiation wears off after a while and you go back to wherever you warped from. It is not an efficient or pleasant way to travel. There are ways to amplify that, but it messes with your psyche. Some people go crazy from it, which we see a little bit of in this 52 issue. There are ways it can go terribly wrong, which we also see in this 52 issue. And it's also very new technology. It was just discovered. It's not like something all of Ran uses. It's something one guy on Ran, Sardath, who is the father of Alana, Adam Strange's love interest. It's one thing he discovered, and it's how Adam Strange is able to teleport back and forth from Earth, Haran, and so on, but he can't go other places with it. It's kind of very limited technology.
Well, thank you for that update on Zeta Beams.
Yeah, now you know about Zeta Beams. And as we know from this issue, we know how terribly wrong it can go.
Yeah, this is the 5G that does actually give you cancer.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. This next question is from That's So Revan, who asks, why are comics so interested in cults without having anything to say about them?
My thoughts on this are pretty straightforward, actually. I think cults are something that show up in other forms of pulp fiction, like noir. And in noir, they are often just used as a plot device. And usually, weirdly, because these kinds of fictions rely on twists so much in their plotting, the things that seem sinister often aren't. So the cults often end up being, like, just weird, but otherwise innocent. I think that tendency means that the aesthetics of the cult is much more interesting than diving into the actual tenets of any kind of religious cult. when you get in there, I mean, also a problem occurs whenever you're inventing like a religion for a story. You have to be really wary that that doesn't take over literally the entire story. Like explaining the religion doesn't become like an arduous hurdle that you have to climb. I often find that kind of thing boring to read. So my impression is that it just, unless you were telling a story specifically about a cult, it becomes very difficult to include a cult in your story because it becomes like a karmic, like, black hole for everything else in the story. Or it's also just like the aesthetics of cults. I mean, you see it like literally also in like True Detective and some of these neo-noirs that happen. The aesthetics of the cult is way more interesting than describing the actual cult.
I like to think of it as sort of a comic book Neapolitan.
Yeah.
You have your Nazis. You have your organized crime rings.
Yeah.
You need another flavor. You need a strawberry.
Yeah.
It can't just be chocolate and vanilla. And what's something you can use over and over? Cults.
Yeah.
People hate cults.
People don't like cults. Of course, there are really like interesting...
But they're fascinated by cults.
Yes. I mean, the NXIVM thing, right? Like everybody, which is also weirdly enough, has a DC comic book connection in that Allison Mack was in the Clark Kent Smallville show.
Yeah.
Which is fucking wild. She was my least favorite character. I found her to be really annoying.
You know what's really bonkers? In season 2 of Superman and Lois, which was the next live-action Superman show after Smallville.
Which is pretty fun, I'll have to say.
There's a recurring bad guy in season 2 of the show who's like this woman who runs this cult, and her name is Allie.
Oh, boy. I mean, they couldn't not, right?
Right.
Like, that's something that the part of the point of Lois and Clark is that, like, really depressingly, the Daily Planet is shut down by venture capital.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, it's a little bit too close to home for me. But other than that, she decides, like, whatever, I'm a reporter. I live in Smallville now. I'll just work for the local paper here.
Right. Which only has one other person working.
Yeah. So I wonder how much she's getting paid, if she's getting paid at all.
It's me and Chrissy Beppo.
It's really funny. But, I mean, it's a surprisingly ethical move for a journalist to make after losing their high-powered career, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I support it. I support journalists going out and creating their own platforms to further their voices.
I think worker-owned co-ops are good.
Yeah. Lois Lane supports it. Why don't you?
We'll see what platform this episode comes out on and whether or not it's funny that we're saying these things. But even though like people are fascinated by cults, the level of abuse that goes on in cults is so disturbing that going through the true, like actually watching, I listened to a podcast about the NXIVM cult. And like when you get to the point where these people are being branded, it becomes a little difficult to listen to because it happened to real people who were compelled and like coerced and threatened into doing things they didn't want to do. A lot of the time, especially in superhero stuff, you want to actually like move away from those places of real trauma and abuse. Like the superheroics can't seem like ineffectual performance in the face of the levels of abuse you experience in a cult. And I think, you know, they want to have, like, as Jaffe just said, like something Nazi-esque, like an acceptable target. Everybody's always going to be mad at a cult because we know the levels of abuse that happen there, but they don't want to portray them because it kind of makes the balance of power in the story go out of whack.
All right. Gita, I do have one question for you before we say goodbye to our listeners and come back next week with issue number 5. And that question is, are you ready?
Alex, are you ready?
I was born ready. 52 Pickup is an Aftermath production created by Gita Jackson and Alex Jaffe and edited by Esper Quinn with original music by John Ahrens. To follow along with us, find 52 at your local library, bookstore, comic store, or digitally on the DC Universe Infinite subscription service, or for free with a library card on Hoopla. The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the show's personalities and do not reflect those of DC Entertainment or Warner Brothers. Please rate and review our show wherever you can, and send your questions and comments to 52mailbag @gmail.com. Never stop reading comics.